So today what we want to talk about is a banking holiday. That's one thing that I hardly ever see covered on social media when there's talk about economic collapse. During the Great Depression, President Roosevelt closed the banks for 100 days. He called that a banking holiday. I'm sure that led to a much deeper crisis than would have otherwise occurred. That there was a lot of politics involved in deciding what banks were solvent and which banks were not solvent, and which were allowed to reopen and which were not. The other thing is, a lot of people lost everything they had in those banks that closed, including the contents of their safety deposit boxes. The few papers and possessions that people had in safety deposit boxes, some of those were returned in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, not 1933. So a lot of historians and people looking at this bank holiday think it was very political. And the decisions made on who could reopen and who couldn't, a lot of those were political decisions. A lot of unsolvent banks were allowed to open, while those that appeared to be solvent were not. This seemed to hit small banks especially hard, while the too big to fails didn't seem to faze them at all. Now, when you look through the history of economic collapses and depressions, you see that it's very common in history that the banks are closed under government authority. The government sorts out what banks they want to reopen and which ones they don't. Now, the big part of this is you need to know that if we continue in this depression we're in and it gets deeper and the hyperinflation gets worse, you can expect that we will have another banking holiday. So you need to think about how you're going to survive when you don't have access to banks, credit cards, ATMs, checks, any of that. So that points out the fact that you need to have enough cash, silver, and gold on hand that you can trade, as well as enough supplies for at least 100 days, because historically it's at least 100 days. I would double that and say that you need to have enough money and wherewithal to survive for 6 months. When you think about this, this could easily be extended to businesses. In the lockdowns that we're in now, the government is actually playing a large role in who reopens and who doesn't, depending on who they extend credit, loans, and grants to. So you can see here, we're pretty much in a business holiday. The question is whether it's going to turn into a banking holiday. So when we talk about the 100-day banking holiday from the Great Depression, certain things come to mind. Number one, you won't have access to ATMs, checks, banking services, credit cards, anything like that. No electronic transactions, no digital banking. That'll all die. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is cryptocurrencies will probably fall under that same provision. You have to have some kind of clearinghouse to convert crypto into cash. So unless you're doing direct crypto transactions and the government decides not to include crypto brokerages in the banking holiday, if the government decides to include cryptocurrencies in the banking holiday as well as their brokerages and exchanges, you won't have access to that either. So that's another thing that people never discuss when they're talking about cryptos. A banking holiday could easily eliminate cryptocurrencies for the same length of time that banking transactions are eliminated. So the big point here is politics is going to play a part in what banks and businesses survive. You can expect that the Democratic Party will primarily support their supporters, and they will not support people that are not in the same political philosophy as them. So if you're not in the governing party when there's a banking holiday, you can expect it to be much worse. So you have to have cash, silver, gold, whatever you're going to buy and sell with during this. And it behooves you to have enough consumables, food, supplies, fuel on hand that you don't have to engage and compete with other people for these commodities. Because when a banking holiday occurs, everything goes to a cash or trade barter basis. And what that does is causes deflation in opposition to the inflation that's currently reigning. So money will become very scarce and very valuable compared to commodities when that occurs. That's a few thoughts and ramblings on banking holidays and the probability they will occur again. Please share your thoughts, rate, subscribe. We'll see you on the next video.